I started noticing something strange about myself. Sometimes, after conversations, especially arguments, I would feel this intense urge saying one final thing. And it doesn't necessarily mean to insult someone, just one more sentence, one more clarification, one more explanation that I felt could completely change of how conversations or the conversations I had ended. And if I never got to say it, my brain would replay the conversation on a loop. And like a movie, it's like a scene refusing to end. And I would have this um, thoughts that if only I said this, maybe they would understood me better, or even maybe the conversation would have ended differently. And honestly, it's exhausting because even after conversations that are already over, mentally, it never really ended. And the more I noticed this pattern, the more I realized that maybe it wasn't just me. A lot of people seem to carry unfinished conversations long after they have already happened. Because sometimes we replay arguments, awkward moments, breakups, misunderstandings, and things that we wish that we have said. And weirdly enough, the emotional exhaustion doesn't come from the conversation itself. It comes from the unfinished version of it living in our minds. And it's like our brains refuse to archive the memory because it feels incomplete. And of course, I see that or read about it that psychologists sometimes connect this to something that is called the need for closure. And us humans naturally dislike unresolved situations because our minds would want endings, certainty, understanding, and even emotional resolutions. Which explains why some people desperately want the last word. Not because they love conflict, I don't, but because psychologically, the conversation still feels open, unfinished, and leaking the emotional energy like a faucet that you forgot to close at 2 a.m. As I keep reflecting on this for the past couple of weeks that I have noticed this pattern that I have, I read about there are different reasons why people do this as well. And honestly, not all of them are bad. There is a pattern that I notice sometimes happen with people pleasers. And these are people who deeply fear of being misunderstood. So after conversations, they mentally replay their tone, their wording, their facial expressions, and even possible interpretations. And if they think that the other people misunderstood them, they feel an urge to rather return to the conversation and explain themselves again and again. And it's not because they want to win, but because they want to close the loop. So for example, someone may say, "You sounded rude earlier." And even when it's not intentional, the person who said that statement, might spend hours thinking about, "No, wait, that wasn't what I meant." And of course, their mind or their brain turns into a director's cut edition of the conversation with the deleted scenes and commentary tracks. Because to them, clarity equals emotional safety. There is another pattern or version that I've noticed as well, because people sometimes want the last word because conversations didn't go within their favor. Maybe they feel embarrassed. Maybe they lost the argument. Maybe their ego even got bruised. So the brain suddenly starts searching for stronger comebacks, hidden flaws from the conversation, mostly on their part, technicalities, and even the things that the other person, the one they're conversing to, had said wrong. Because it's not necessarily mean to understand, but to recover from the emotional control. And this is why people send paragraphs hours later after an argument suddenly ended. Because their mind is still fighting it, though the conversation already left the building, technically. And it's like an emotional overtime that nobody asked for. And the difficult part is, sometimes the need for the last word isn't really about the other person, but it's how they protect on how they see themselves. Last words sometimes carries an emotional weight. It could be a final apology, a final explanation, a final expression of love, or a final attempt to be understood. Because humans attach meaning to endings. The final scene really matters to us. That's why breakups, unfinished friendships, or even unresolved conversations can haunt people for years. Not because the entire relationship was bad, but because the ending was never emotionally landed properly. But what's interesting that I've read about is that people who constantly need the last word and the people who don't often look similar on the outside. But internally, they process conflict very differently. For the side of people who need the last word often, they have struggle with uncertainty. They replay these conversations repeatedly, as mentioned earlier. They might even feel emotionally unfinished. They fear misunderstanding and attach identity of being correct. And lastly, they may feel discomfort when the conversations end abruptly. So, for them, silence can feel like losing, or worse, be unseen. And at the other side, for people who don't need the last word are not always more mature. Because sometimes they simply tolerate ambiguity better, detach emotionally faster. They even might have prioritized peace over resolution, or even accept that not every misunderstanding can be fixed. So they might have thought, they misunderstood me, that's unfortunate, but I can live with that. Something along those lines. Which honestly feels like a superpower, because as for overthinkers, conversations can become a mental escape rooms that you keep searching and searching and searching for the correct sentence, hoping it unlocks peace. But there isn't a perfect sentence. And that realization, I find it quite uncomfortable. And the strangest part of all of this is that sometimes the conversation isn't even happening anymore. But emotionally, our bodies still act like it is. So we rehearse imaginary scenarios, we prepare imaginary rebuttals, and we even create alternate endings. And over time, these can quietly affect our mood, our energy, and even emotional health. Because carrying unresolved conversations is mentally exhausting. And I know that for sure. When the other person had already moved on, especially, and while your brain is still producing season 14 of the argument, that's why learning conversations end, even imperfectly, is very important. Because not every misunderstanding will be corrected, not every ending will feel satisfying, And not every silence means you lost. Sometimes, silence is simply the point of where peace begins. I think wanting the last word is deeply human because at its core, it's usually come from one thing: the desire to feel understood, whether it's validation, pride, fear, love, regret, ego, even protection. Most people aren't actually fighting for the words, they're actually fighting for the meaning, for closure, or even emotional certainty. But maybe real growth begins when we realize that closure doesn't always come from saying the one final, perfect sentence. Sometimes closure comes from accepting that the conversation already ended, even if our minds wants one more scene. And honestly, that might be the hardest last word of all. So if you enjoy conversations about my discovery about psychology sometimes, or even human behavior, strange patterns, and the quiet things that people rarely talk about, subscribe to me, Mabuhay, it's Ate Joe, and comment below the answer for my question for today. Have you ever replayed a conversation for days that because of something you wish you had said? See you on the next one. Bye bye for now.